Hi, thanks for joining me today. My name is Jamie, and I'm a TOEFL speaking specialist from tstprep.com. Today, I'm going to address with you some secret words and phrases that are most effective to helping you get your desired speaking score. Why don't we jump right into it? Okay, so again, the theme or topic I want to address today are the secret words and phrases for a better speaking score. My name is Jamie. Okay, I have a bachelor's degree in Spanish education and a master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages. I have over 19 years of ESL experience. In terms of the TST Prep website, I do a little bit of everything, including the speaking evaluations, group and private speaking classes. When I'm not teaching, I do enjoy spending time with my family. Today, we're going to talk about the most effective kinds of words and phrases to use in TOEFL speaking. We're also going to examine the pros and cons of using speaking templates. I want to tell you about a special opportunity. Right now, we have a great promotion going on at tstprep.com. Typically, our speaking evaluations cost $29. But just for a few more weeks, you can get a 30-minute private speaking evaluation with me for only $9. So in that 30 minutes, we'll get to know each other a little bit, and I can listen to you answer 3 speaking questions, and I can advise you on your weak areas and give you specific steps to improving those areas. Now, this promotion is only good until June 1st, so there's only a couple more weeks to take advantage of this great deal. I had a really nice opportunity to work with a student, Frederick. And Frederick said, for most people, including me, it's really difficult to assess their own speaking skills because they don't have the needed objectivity and experience. That's why I would recommend the speaking evaluation at TST Prep. So Frederick had a good positive experience, and I would invite you to check it out and do the same. So one of the key criteria in your TOEFL responses is your vocabulary. So you can see here, this is a sample portion of a score report. If you requested a speaking evaluation through ETS, through their speech rater, one of the criteria they would score you on is your vocabulary depth. So here they give you a little description about what that means. Vocabulary depth is a measure of your vocabulary range. Strong speakers tend to use a variety of words. A higher score indicates that you probably used words that are less common and are more precise. So what does that mean? Well, my first thought about this topic of words and phrases is that the goal of TOEFL speaking is to be as natural and conversational as possible. Your responses should sound like you're sitting in a coffee shop, chatting with your girlfriends, hanging out with your buddies. You should showcase language that is very, very informal, casual, and cool. The kind of social language that native speakers use every day. So that piece of advice is often surprising to some students. Students say to me, Jamie, this is an academic exam, or I'm trying to use this exam to enter a PhD program, to go to graduate school, to gain a professional license. I feel like I need to showcase my academic skills and vocabulary. Well, in terms of the speaking, they really do want to hear natural, native-like conversational speech. So for students who have perhaps only learned English from textbooks, it might be a little bit challenging to bring in this natural, native-like conversational style. So I'm going to give you some specific pointers on way you can help your English language sound more native-like. So even though TOEFL is an academic test, it's also an English test. If you are proficient and fluent in speaking English, You should sound comfortable and natural on your speaking responses. So let's talk about some transitional phrases. As I mentioned earlier, I do TOEFL speaking evaluations, and I often hear students use the same rigid, formal transitional phrases in their evaluations. For example, in question number 1, I often hear students state their opinion. For example, in a question like, some people like to study in a traditional classroom. Other people like to study online. Which do you prefer and why? An example of a very rigid, formal structure that I often hear students use is something like this. For me, I prefer to study in the traditional classroom. I feel this way for the following 2 reasons. My first reason is, for example, my second reason is, for example, these are the 2 reasons why I feel this way. Well, I think you'll agree with me, listening to that sample response, it sounds like a robot is speaking. It sounds very, very rigid and formal and overly structured. Also, to me, a lot of those phrases sound more like paragraph writing. They're not the kinds of phrases that I would use if I'm sitting in the coffee shop chatting with my girlfriends. So that's an example that shows you the importance of having some style and some structure that is natural and native sounding, spontaneous even. So I want to share with you here some transitional words and phrases that you can adopt to make your responses sound more natural. So when you're introducing examples, you might try something like, take blank as an example. For example, in question number 1, I sometimes rely not on my own personal experience, but maybe the experience of one of my friends, or my mother, my brother, my sister, my roommate, my cousin. I could say something like, take my friend Michael as an example. Okay, and then I can introduce a detail about him. I could use other phrases like, one example of this is, or I remember when, I once heard about, I will never forget when. I also really like the phrase, it reminds me of. I often use that one when I introduce my past tense personal experience, which I think is a good thing to include in question number 1. In question number 1, we often have opportunities to state our preference and our opinion. So you might try little phrases like, in my opinion, I do believe that, I definitely think that. If I were asked, I would say that. Okay, that's a little bit grammatically complex, a conditional statement there. Or to be honest. So these are nice, natural ways for you to introduce your opinion, your preference or belief, again, which is required in the response of question number 1. Then when we get into the integrated passages, you might try out some phrases like, according to the reading, or the reading passage starts off by saying that. The author of the reading passage claims, the short text mentions that, or simply in the reading. Okay, these are natural ways for you to introduce material from the reading portion. Now, I want to point out in that second phrase, the reading passage starts off by saying that. Here I encounter a phrasal verb, starts off, okay? I think phrasal verbs are a nice category or group of words that native speakers utilize a lot. And I think it's a good way to grow your natural vocabulary. So I suggest that you study phrasal verbs. Let's look at these words in the listening passage. The professor goes into a ton of detail about. Goes into a ton of detail about. There's another phrasal verb. The listening passage provides an interesting example of. To provide an interesting example of, okay? According to the listening. Towards the end of the talk, the lecturer says, Or an idiomatic expression. Right off the bat, the professor says. Right off the bat, meaning immediately or right away. So these are some nice transitional words and phrases that you could utilize to introduce key parts of your responses, again, without sounding overly robotic, stiff, and formal. Let's continue. Another really nice category of words that you should try to include in your responses are adverbs. In fact, I always advise my students to include 2 or 3 adverbs in every response. Adverbs can help you sound very native-like. They're also a nice opportunity to put in some feeling and emotion. That's particularly important on TOEFL. And I often think that adverb-adjective combinations are a nice way to express some more dramatic feeling and emotion. So here are some suggested adverbs. Words like pretty. So not meaning beautiful or, an attractive quality, but we're trying to put extra emphasis on the truthfulness or the factuality of something. So like, this is a pretty controversial topic nowadays. So similar to like really or very, adding extra meaning to a word. It was pretty scary to hear the professor to say that. Okay, so that's a really natural word and phrase. We could use honestly, okay? Again, when we state our opinion, I honestly believe, or I honestly think. You could try to use the word just to add a little bit more extra, exactness. Like, I believe that high school uniforms are just what students need. So sort of like the word exactly, they're exactly what students need. Or we could use it in a negative sentence. It's not just the fact that high school uniforms are more convenient, but they also are, okay? How about the word really? I really believe that high school uniforms are better for students, or really, there's no doubt about it. So again, it's a way for you to express your emotion, connect. Now, these are just some adverbs. I often advise students to use adverbs like definitely, totally, absolutely, basically, probably, essentially, likely, interestingly enough. These kinds of phrases can be really effective. You also probably noted there's some like music and rhythm to my voice when I present these ideas. Again, it's a nice opportunity to work on your intonation, your music and rhythm of English. Well, there's a little bit of a caution here. The problem with learning casual speech, you should not use these words and phrases if you sound like a robot. So it's not as simple as just memorizing words and throwing them into your response and magic, you're going to get this amazing TOEFL score. There is a really important factor, and that's the sound of your performance. So you've got to deliver these with strong pronunciation and intonation. That's really, really critical. So take, for example, that adverb really. I hear students use that a lot. But for many non-native speakers of English, it presents some difficult letter sounds, the R sound, the L sound. And if this is a word that isn't said naturally, well, then it's not very effective, okay? So it's got to have a native-like pronunciation and intonation. Now, that also brings me to talk about idioms. When I work with my private students and my group class students, I do like to share lots of different idiomatic phrases. I think these can be a very effective way to make you sound more native-like. However, again, there's that caution. The idiomatic phrase needs to be spoken with some natural sounding delivery. Let's go back to that idiom that was presented earlier. And that was right here, right off the bat, the last one on the list here, right off the bat, the professor says that. So right off the bat is an English idiom meaning immediately or right away. Now, because the meaning of this phrase is immediately or right away, it's got to be spoken with some fast music and rhythm. Meaning a speaker who very robotically, mechanically says right off the bat, this is no longer an effective phrase because it's just standing out in the response as sounding awkward, unnatural, there's issues with accent and delivery. But if you can blend or link those words together and speak them in a continuous way, right off the bat, the professor says that, now you're following the natural music and rhythm and delivery of these words. So delivering them in a natural sounding way is absolutely critical. Let's continue talking about some adverbs that I mentioned. So again, here are some other useful adverb phrases. We could use the word actually. Believe it or not, I actually believe. Okay, I actually believe. I'm sort of stating my true feelings. Probably, okay? So something's likely to be true. It's probably better for students to wear school uniforms because, how about especially, okay? When we're trying to, add extra emphasis, sort of like the adverb really. I especially like the uniforms they use in Italian schools. Definitely, okay? Add certainty, almost 100% certainty. I definitely believe that high school students should wear school uniforms. So I'm adding a lot of, strength and emotion. Basically, okay? So it's the most important or essential information. Basically, school uniforms are a better option when compared to no uniforms. So you can see how these adverbs can be critical. And again, it's very important that they're spoken with a natural sounding delivery. So let's talk about templates for a moment. Some students are a little, leery. They're a little bit nervous about using templates. Perhaps you've heard that, templates can be effective, or on the other hand, maybe you've heard that they should be avoided. Well, let's go ahead and examine some pros and cons of using templates. So let me first tell you my truth, my feeling and opinion. I love templates. I'm a big believer in them. And I do work with my students to try to adopt templates that feel natural and comfortable for them. I think that a major advantage of using a template is that before the question appears on the screen, you have some pre-memorized and predetermined structure. You typically know exactly how you're going to begin that response. You typically have some sort of pre-memorized transitional words that you'll use to organize or structure your response. And you've got your go-to conclusion, the conclusion that you plan to use in that response. So you've got some structure. And that can obviously help you reduce your stress and anxiety when you already feel so nervous on the exam. So, the exam begins, they're going over some basic instructions with you. Well, while you're listening, you can be writing down those templates on your note paper. And that way, before speaking question 1 even appears on the screen, I have my template laid out on my note paper. I'm prepared with how I'm going to take my notes. And then I can focus on the spontaneity of the response, the spontaneous content that I have to create. So I think there are definitely some benefits to having some pre-memorized structure. Now let's consider the cons, okay, the negative aspects. Some students can develop robotic voices, meaning because they've memorized something, it's almost like they go from start to the end, in one robotic delivery, okay? So yeah, I have a pre-memorized structure for question 1, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to speak it in a way that sounds very obviously pre-memorized. So let me give you an example of what that would sound like. So for instance, one of the templates that I like to use for question 1 is to organize my response around 2 main reasons. So if I share this template with you, okay, I'll show you how it can accidentally be delivered in a robotic fashion. Oh, I'm not sure that you can see my chat box here. Let me go ahead and paste this in another format. I forget that I'm not teaching, interactive live class here. Let me go ahead and share this screen with you here. Make that a little bit smaller. All right, let's rock and roll here. Okay, so let me share this with you. So here's one of my sample templates for question 1. And again, this is one where I organize my response around 2 reasons. So I typically begin my response with some sort of introductory phrase. Maybe today I'll try out this one, personally speaking. Okay, just one of them there. And then I'm going to go ahead and try to organize my response around 2 reasons why I feel this way. So I'm going to say, first of all, and I'm going to give my first reason, and I'm going to support that reason with a simple present tense example. And then typically I like to say by the same token, which is just a more casual, cool way to say also or secondly. I'm going to state my second reason, and I'm going to support that with a past tense personal experience. I typically use the phrase, I remember when, and I try to bring in my past tense personal experience. Then I like to wrap up my response with an idiom, a natural, cool sounding phrase to make a long story short, and I wrap up my main idea. Now, because this is all predetermined in my mind, some students have the bad habit of rushing through this in a very robotic manner. Let's take that example that I mentioned earlier. Some students like to study in the traditional classroom. Other students like to study online. Which type of learning do you prefer and why? So let's imagine that I'm going to answer this question. Now, my first objective in my notes is I'm going to try to think of 2 reasons why I prefer, my preference. So I'm going to talk about relationships. I'm going to talk about, well, first I got to pick my preference. I'm going to talk about the traditional classroom. That's my preferred style. And the first reason I like the traditional classroom is that I can make some friends. I'm a social person. I like to meet people. And the second reason I like the traditional classroom is I can interact with my professor. Okay? So in terms of 15 seconds, in reality, that's probably all the time I have to take some notes. So the rest, has to be sort of spontaneous, my details and example. Now, let me go ahead and give you what I consider to be a robotic sounding response, meaning I'm going to just rely on those memorized sentences and I'm going to speak them with really, really weak, poor intonation, music and rhythm. Okay. I guess I'll time myself for 45 seconds, but it's not often that I try to give bad responses. I'll try my best. Personally speaking, I definitely prefer to study in the traditional classroom. I feel this way for 2 reasons. First of all, in the traditional classroom, I can make lots of friends. For example, I can get to know my classmates and we can study and hang out together outside of class, like on the weekends. By the same token, in the traditional classroom, I can interact a lot with my professor. I remember when I studied in a traditional classroom in high school. Well, I asked my professor a lot of questions and he answered them immediately. And guess what? That helped me pass my exam with flying colors. To make a long story short, studying in the traditional classroom is best. Okay. So, because the sentences were predetermined, I sort of just relied on a script. I was not speaking in a natural, spontaneous way. I was really lacking in energy and passion and excitement and emotion because I was relying on a script. So I have to caution you that when you use templates, you need to deliver them in a spontaneous, natural way. Now, one of the key things that you can do is be sure to pause between your sentences. you need to have that brief pause so that it doesn't sound like you've just memorized the next phrase, but it sounds like that phrase has just jumped into your mind. Also, I think it's very effective to have some energy and passion, excitement in your voice. Now, let me go ahead and give you the same a 45-second response. With this time, I'll follow the same content, basically the same ideas, but with a much more effective intonation. Personally speaking, I definitely prefer to study in the traditional classroom. First of all, when I'm in a traditional classroom, I have a great opportunity to build relationships with my classmates. For example, I can actually get to know them personally and make friendships. In fact, we can even hang out together on the weekends and build long-lasting relationships. By the same token, when I study in the traditional classroom, I get opportunities to interact with my professor. I remember when I studied in the traditional physics classroom. Well, I asked my professor a ton of questions, and guess what? I got an A+ on my exam. Okay. I didn't have time for the conclusion, but I wanted to focus on giving you a much more melodic, like there was music and energy to my voice, and it wasn't overly obvious that I just followed a memorized script. So that's something you need to consider when you're developing your templates. It's extra important that A, you're using natural, spontaneous, casual phrases, and B, you're delivering it with good, spontaneous energy. Okay, so another con to using templates is you might struggle putting the template, using the template and the content. So this sometimes happens in the academic lectures, like questions 3 and 4. We don't really know what style that we're going to encounter there. When I meet with my private and group students, when we talk about question 3, I think in the majority of cases, question 3, the lecture typically presents one big theme or example. But sometimes we hear 2 examples. And therefore, if you're just stuck in one rigid template, and then suddenly the content presented doesn't fit with the template you've devised, you might not be able to react and adjust yourself really naturally and quickly. So sometimes we have to be flexible. We have to realize that that content does not fit perfectly into the template, and we have to be able to, react spontaneously. Sometimes templates are too structured. Again, those kinds that say like, for the following 2 reasons, again, they're just lacking natural sounding vocabulary. Sometimes people feel limited. They don't feel they can be creative. I'll be honest, I work with a lot of students who tackle question number 1, the independent question, without using any template at all. They feel like it's best just to speak naturally from their heart, and that can be really effective at times. And then some people just feel uncomfortable. Some people get stressed out about having to memorize stuff, like, it causes them more stress to memorize something that they didn't create, it didn't feel natural to them. Well, something else I want to add here related to templates is there's not one template that fits all. So if you invest in lessons and support at TST Prep, we're going to provide you with many different options of templates. And sometimes it's like, okay, I like this phrase here is really easy for me to say. Oh, this one I knew before. Yep, I've said that phrase before. It's comfortable to me. So it might be a matter of you taking our guidance and advice and creating the template that works best for you. So nobody's ever going to force you to follow any specific script. It's your experience. So let's address idioms. I'm a big fan of idioms. Meaning I think they can be very, very effective. Earlier, we talked about using phrasal verbs. We talked about using adverbs. Well, idioms is another category that I like to help students sound more natural and native-like. But again, there's a little bit of a caution. You've got to deliver that idiomatic phrase with strong music and rhythm. So one of the idioms that I often use in my response for question number 1 is, it's a piece of cake. So this phrase implies that something's really easy. It doesn't take a lot of brain power for you. So remember in question 1, they typically ask you to state your preference about something or your opinion. Think back to that question earlier. Some people like to study in the traditional classroom. Other people like to study online. Which do you prefer and why? So when presented with that, I might throw in an idiom like, for me, this choice is a piece of cake. I definitely prefer to study in the traditional classroom. So I generally have some good energy when I say this phrase because it's positive, it's energetic. The conclusion that I sometimes use in question number 1, to make a long story short, it works perfectly in the concluding position. And the way that I typically finish that sentence is I repeat my main idea with an adjective. So again, I might say something like, to make a long story short. Studying, I might use a gerund, an ing form of the verb, in the traditional classroom is, and then any sort of adjective that feels, natural and comfortable for you. I might use the one, is awesome. A lot of energy and excitement. Other idioms right off the bat, again, meaning immediately or right away. This is a phrase that I typically use in question number 2 when I state the man or woman's opinion about the announcement. Right off the bat, the woman says that she isn't crazy about the announcement. So you'll notice I used more of a lower tone to show a negative feeling or emotion. We could say that something is a big deal or it's not a big deal, depending on your level of feeling about it. It depends on who you ask, but many think that forcing students to wear school uniforms is a big deal. Okay, this is really important. How about another phrasal verb? It comes down to. So whether or not students should wear school uniforms comes down to the opinion of the student. So what is the main essential point here? So these are some useful idiomatic expressions that could help you sound more native-like. We continue. On top of that, I love this transitional word as a way to add an additional detail. So rather than always say secondly or also, on top of that, again, it's just a nice natural phrase to give an additional detail. Here's another idiom. It's a no-brainer. This one is synonymous. It's got the same meaning as it's a piece of cake, just meaning that it's a really easy decision. So again, I would substitute that back in question number 1. For me, this choice is a no-brainer. I definitely prefer to study in the traditional classroom. And ultimately, some students find one of those expressions maybe easier to pronounce, easier to utilize, whatever feels comfortable for you. How about the phrase, believe it or not? This one is nice because it might be used when you present something a little bit surprising or controversial. Believe it or not, I do think that high school students should wear school uniforms. I'll tell you another one that's not included on this chart, but I've been using a lot lately. In question number 1, I often use the phrase, and guess what? I use this phrase when I want to say something a little bit surprising or, especially interesting. And guess what? So when I talk about the traditional classroom, I can say something like, first of all, studying in the traditional classrooms allows students to make really good friends. For example, you can meet people who will remain your close buddies for years to come. I remember when I took a traditional physics class. Well, I sat next to a woman named Susan. And guess what? 20 years later, she's still my best friend. So you can see how I could insert that phrase to help the response sound a little bit more interactive, casual, cool style. So for me, that phrase is sort of similar to believe it or not. You know, it's a way to insert something that's a little bit surprising or attention getting. So how about, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead here. How about another idiom? You could say someone is crazy about something, or someone is not a big fan of something. So I really like these phrases, particularly in question number 2, when your job is to state the man or a woman's opinion about something. And the reason why I like these phrases in particular is they're good alternatives to agree and disagree. Now, I mention that because I meet a lot of non-native speakers who struggle with that GR sound in English. They have a lot of difficulty saying, the man completely agrees with this decision. And you could use a phrase, an alternative, you know, the man is crazy about this decision. The man is a big fan of this decision. Or we could use these in the alternative situation. Instead of saying, right off the bat, the man completely disagrees with this decision. It could be something like, right off the bat, the man is not crazy about this decision. Or right off the bat, the man is not a big fan of this decision. Okay, so those are good alternatives, especially if you struggle with that GR sound in agree or disagree. Okay, to be honest. So notice how I deliver that phrase. I'm not separately saying to be honest. No, so I've got to deliver that in a natural way. Now, because I have a preposition to, and then I have a silent H, I'm going to blend and say this in one continuous breath. To be honest. Okay, so again, that relates to the delivery. The delivery and the sound of the phrase is just as important as the words that you choose. Okay, so these are nice, natural ways to improve your vocabulary. So earlier we talked about phrasal verbs as a category of words that can help you sound more natural and native-like. We looked at some adverbs that can be very effective and useful, and we looked at idioms. I'm going to mention one more category here that I want to draw your attention to, and that's the idea about collocations. If you're not familiar with this word collocations, the meaning of the word collocation just means like words that are very commonly combined or used together. For example, if I say the phrase, it's a waste of, you're likely going to finish that sentence with a combination of like, it's a waste of time, or maybe it's a waste of money. Those are known as collocations because when I say it's a waste of, it's traditionally combined with a small handful of commonly used words or phrases. So studying collocations can be a very, very useful way to grow your natural sounding vocabulary. And there's all sorts of collocations. For example, verb collocations. Many students I meet struggle with the difference between make and do. So for example, in English, we always say, I make a mistake. But we also say, I do research. We say, I have to make a decision. But we say, I have to do my homework. And students often mistakenly use the wrong verbs in those situations. So learning collocations, verb collocations, and other kinds of collocations can help you sound more native-like. So these are some categories that can definitely help you use the best kinds of words and phrases in your TOEFL response. So let's revisit one more critical piece here. Throughout this presentation, I've mentioned the importance of natural sounding delivery. Well, how do you know if you're speaking the idiom in a natural native-like way? Or how do you know that you're pronouncing agree or disagree in a natural way? Well, a great resource for you is this website, Youglish. So this is described as a powerful site you can use to find examples of any word or phrase you need to hear. So let me demonstrate to you what Youglish looks like. So you can go to Youglish, and I typically select US because I want to focus on American English pronunciation personally. And then I can type in any word or phrase. So for example, the word agree. And I simply put that in there, and immediately they're going to provide me 42,949 different examples of speakers using this, native speakers, in natural sounding sentences. So let's go ahead and listen and just get
for the things of the mind. Now, we may not agree with what religions are trying to teach us, but
I lost the American English one.
Because he was an...
We can all agree on the imperative of smart development.
Because you see globally, but in global activity, and obviously a lot in America, do you agree with?
Then they also need to agree that I preside over it.
Okay, so you could slow these phrases down, you could repeat them, and you could listen to 36,000 different examples of native speakers demonstrating this kind of word or phrase. And this is also true with phrases, I believe. Let's try the phrase no-brainer. And obviously we're going to get fewer. I only got 837, but let's hear some.
So for me, it was kind of a no-brainer that was the question for Trump. And I had...
So it's, this will be economically a no-brainer.
Yeah.
It will look.
So these are sort of fun to see what kind of famous people pop up on these or, you know, news clips. But you can use the site Youglish to model your speech after a native-like speakers. So Youglish is a good resource for you. So another thing you can consider is you can look for synonymous words and phrases you feel comfortable saying, okay? So again, if I presented phrases to you today and you're like, ooh, right off the bat, I've never heard of that phrase. It doesn't really feel comfortable to me. I don't, you know, I feel awkward using it. Well, try something that is synonymous in meaning, like right away, or immediately, or without any hesitation. You can pick the phrases that are comfortable for you. So again, I want to remind you that you've got a great opportunity right now. You can buy a private speaking evaluation with me for just $9, and this is only going to be valid for just a couple more weeks. So now's the time to seize this opportunity. Again, we're here to help you at TST Prep get your TOEFL score as quickly and easily as possible. Thanks for tuning in today. Remember, trying to sound casual, cool, and informal is the secret to performing really, really well in your speaking task. All right? I look forward to having an opportunity to sharing some more ideas with you next week. And again, thanks for watching. Bye.